And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Hoops HD Bracket Rundown show. I am your host, Chad Sherwood. Joining me tonight over there, or maybe it's over that way, I can't even tell anymore, David Griggs. Down
It's
below me,
Tuesday,
John
Chad.
Titel, John
Why are we doing this
Salika.
on Tuesday, Chad?
Because we're doing it on Tuesday, David.
Oh,
Do whatever we
okay.
want.
I never thought of it that way before.
We could do one of these at like a 3 a.m. on a Wednesday if we wanted to, couldn't we?
Sure.
All right. I mean, I'm not going to be up. I don't know that any of us are going to be up, but
If it were just me, at least we'd finally get it right.
we really need to do one of these shows where though we actually just sit here, we watch David watching TV, because that's just like watching at the end of a basketball game these days.
Right.
Watching someone watch TV. But anyhow, what we are going to do on today's show is build a 1 through 68 seed list, or at least 1 through the end of the at-large bid seed list. A seed list, just to define a few terms here, is what the actual selection committee will build after selecting the 36 at-large teams, pairing them up with the 32 automatic bids, which gives us our field of 68. They will then seed them 1 through 68 and proceed to then place them into the bracket. What we're going to do on this show is kind of those first two steps, both selecting the teams and seeding them, at least until we get through all the at-large bids being in here. I'm then going to kind of arbitrarily throw in the rest of the teams. And if you look down there, don't do it yet, but after we're done with the podcast, look down there under us. You will see the final bracket that we're going to build.
There it is.
I'm going to put together after the show tonight based on these selections. Just as a note, we're recording this around 9:25 on Tuesday the 17th. So a couple of the late games to note tonight, most notably this Michigan-Wisconsin game, are not going to be factored into any of the decisions tonight. David, we want to start by defining a few other terms, though. One of the terms is protected seed that we use a lot. What is a protected seed?
Essentially, it is a top 16 team or a team that lands on the 1, 2, 3, or 4 lines. And it's a figure of speech that we use, but not that we use, but it is an actual term because essentially they are protected from being on the bad end of a home court advantage during the round of 64. Now, it's kind of preposterous because there's no one really on the 13 or 16 line, at least not very many, where you would really perceive it to be a home court advantage for them. Like if, for instance, if North Carolina gets sent to Greensville, there's nobody really there that could be placed there that would be a home court advantage over them anyway, but that's what it is. They're protected from a home court advantage for the round of 64.
Okay. A couple other terms that we may throw out there is what we call a first ballot team. That generally means probably the top 8 to 9 lines worth of teams up to about the first 36 teams. These are teams that generally would get in from the selection committee in their initial voting before they get down to the crunch of things, which is probably the last 10 or so at-large bids. And those are basically considered the bubble teams, the teams that may or may not be in, change almost on a daily basis, plus the first group of teams right outside, the teams outside the bubble. David, did I define all the terms?
I think so.
All right.
We got first. So inside the bubble means in the field but not on the first ballot. Outside means within reach but not in. And on the bubble means like squarely it could go one way or another. Is that right?
Those are the coin flip teams, exactly. Yeah. And what I've done is gone ahead and pulled up our bracket here. This is or not a bracket, but our seed list. This is the list of the 68 spots on here that we're going to fill in tonight. And why don't we get right into it? And Stalika, since David has spoken more than enough already, as have I, honestly. Let me start with you, Stalika. Why don't you tell me who is, as of right now, January 12th, who are the 4 number 1 seeds?
Well, first of all, I would have Villanova at the very top of this line. And then I would have Baylor, Kansas, and Kentucky as the other number 1s in that order.
Villanova, Baylor, Kansas, and Kentucky. John Titel, do you agree with him?
I do. I still love, as much as I love undefeated teams, I just don't think Gonzaga has enough meat compared to those other guys who have had a lot of power conference wins. UCLA is also in the discussion, but I think Stalika nailed it.
David, let's see if we can go 3 for 3 here.
No. Now, again,
you're muted. You're out. Go ahead.
Well, again, We didn't really mention this either, Chad. The purpose of this is not to guess what the real committee will do. It's to act as if we are the committee and put together the field the way we think it should be. John Titel guesses the committee, and he posts that every week. But for the sake of this is just what we think it should be. We're going to tell the committee what they need to be doing. Florida State is on my one line. I have Villanova, Kansas is the top two. Florida State's on my one line. I liked them last week. I don't think losing at North Carolina dings them at all. And I know that overall their paper is weak, but my fourth number one is UCLA. I think they have the single most impressive win that any team has, and they only have one loss at the buzzer to an Oregon team that probably won't lose at home all year. So, I can't really ding them for that either. They're my fourth overall team.
Well, as you can see, our bottom right corner here is working this week. It wasn't last week, so I could actually show some of these teams that we have not put in. Villanova and Kansas being a consensus already. John Titel, let me go back to you here. Do you think David is insane by saying Florida State, and despite the loss, and UCLA are one seeds right now over Baylor and Kentucky?
I don't think UCLA is that insane. And while Florida State is not insane, because when you have wins over Florida, Virginia, and Duke, that is a great resume. A loss to North Carolina is a good loss. So I don't have a problem with it. I just think that, as Stalika said, like, the other guys have better wins and more wins and quality losses, et cetera, et cetera. If you wanted to do head-to-head, I understand UCLA beat Kentucky, so if everything was equal, of course I'd pick the Bruins over the Wildcats. I don't know that everything's equal. Kentucky beat some team called North Carolina, who just beat Florida State, blah, blah, blah.
Well, here, I'm going to pull up both Florida State and Kentucky's profile here. And Stalika, let me go back to you to kind of show us where David is wrong. This is that Florida State profile. A win at Virginia, home win over Florida. There's other stuff in the top 50, but including the Duke win. But when you get out of the top 50, you got Virginia Tech, and that's it. You turn to a team like Kentucky, and you've got, I think, a lot more. Do you want to make the argument here?
Well, like John T. said, we're also talking about the quality of Kentucky's losses right here. I mean, UCLA, I can see why there would be an argument for putting the Bruins up there, but they haven't done much outside of that game. And losing at Louisville, that's a lot less offensive than losing against Temple.
And David, we see there that loss against Temple by Florida State. If we want to add UCLA into this equation as well, let me pull up their profile. Again, you don't see nearly the quantity up here that we're seeing on these other teams. Nebraska, I know how much credit you give that, but at Kentucky and what else?
Well, again, and it's more or less of how good do I think the team actually is. I realize that if you're looking at quantity, there's not as much there. But if you're looking at how good the team is, I think the game that UCLA won at Kentucky is a harder game to win than what anybody else has done. And the game that they lost was probably – I don't think anybody has a win that we're talking about that's as good as that loss, certainly not Kentucky. They haven't won a game that was as good as that loss. So –
But David, isn't beating Michigan State, North Carolina
as good as winning at Oregon? They didn't get North Carolina at North Carolina.
Neutral court. It wasn't a
It was neutral, but I still think it's harder to win at Oregon than it is to beat North Carolina on a neutral court. It's a good win. I just don't think it's as good as their win as UCLA's win at Kentucky.
Well, David, you have been overruled.
Well, you're wrong.
Baylor and Kentucky will finish out the one line. Obviously, UCLA and Florida State definitely need serious consideration here on the two line. David, I know you would have them already. Who would be your other two to join them at this point, though?
Okay, let me do some scrubbing here because I got to make sure that I'm looking. Okay, I have on the two line, let me see. So Gonzaga and North Carolina would be my next two teams.
Okay, so you would have both Gonzaga and North Carolina here.
Yes.
Titel, would you agree with those as UCLA, Florida State, Gonzaga, and North Carolina?
That's pretty solid. As much as I want to put Creighton in for an amazing schedule with only a loss to a number one overall Villanova team, since I like to project what they're going to do in March, and with the terrible news of Mo Watson's torn ACL that came out overnight, right now Creighton might be better than Carolina, but in 2 months there's no way they're going to be. So I like David's 4.
Yeah, and Salika, this is a really interesting debate. We could have both now, and it would be an interesting debate if this was the end of the season now. What do you do with a team like Creighton that does have, pulling up the profile here, you see just an amazing profile, only the one loss to Villanova, a couple of top 50 road wins, some neutral court wins up there, the huge home win over Butler, but Mo Watson is out now. Do you dock them?
I don't dock them yet, although keep in mind, I would actually have had them as my first number 3 seed. I mean, they have 4 wins against teams that I'm pretty sure are going to be in the field. If you count Wisconsin, Seton Hall, Butler, as well as the win at Xavier. I mean, I'm not sure what's going to happen when they play top teams like Villanova or Butler. It's going to be middle teams like Xavier, Seton Hall, Marquette, Providence. That's what I want to see what the Blue Jays do.
And what a horrible, horrible injury. We touched on it the other night. It was announced today he's out for the year. And I don't even want to – all year long I'd been preaching about a Creighton demise, but it was under circumstances very different than this. I hate it for this program. I hate it for the kid. I hate it for their fans. To be having this kind of a season and then to have to go to an injury like that to such a key player. It's horrible.
I would argue there's a bit of a mixed blessing given the timing for Creighton because at least with 12 games to go in the regular season, they do have time to really figure out the team chemistry without Watson in the lineup. It would have been a lot worse had this happened towards the tail end of the regular season and you don't have quite as much time to tinker your lineup.
And especially if you look at their next 3 games here, Marquette at home, at Georgetown, at DePaul, definitely chances with 2 home games and a road game against an absolutely horrendous Georgetown team to figure it out before they go into the game at Butler on January 31st. But so, Salika, who would be your 4 number 2 seeds?
This is where I would agree as far as having Florida State and UCLA on that line, but if you remember what I said last night, I would also include Notre Dame as actually my top ACC team, and this is where I would add Gonzaga because if we're talking about the Bulldogs, let's not forget they beat Arizona on a neutral floor, but they also have pretty good wins against Florida and Iowa State as part of the Advocare Invitational, and you can now add a win against St. Mary's onto their ledger.
Well, so the team you would leave off of this 2 line then would be North Carolina. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Let's take a look at that for a second, this North Carolina versus Notre Dame debate. And let me pull up this Notre Dame profile. David, could you want to tell him where he's wrong about Notre Dame being a 2 seed at this point?
I know that they're undefeated in conference, but their best win is at home against Northwestern, and they had to sweat that one out. Now, Northwestern is good, perhaps on the fringe of being a first ballot team or even wearing white, but that's not a 2-seed caliber win. It just doesn't pop out at you the way everybody else on the 2 line seems to have monster wins already, minus Gonzaga, who still they have 2 really good ones.
All right, and I'm pull up the North Carolina profile here as a comparison, and Titel, when we look at this, Wisconsin at Clemson, Florida State, a couple of questionable losses that Notre Dame does not have. Do you think this is a close argument here at least?
It is. I think that the Georgia Tech loss is a bad loss, even though people want to put Georgia Tech in the tournament. As far as a best Big Ten win, I think Carolina's win over Wisconsin is a little better than Notre Dame's win over Northwestern. And as far as best ACC win, I think Carolina's win over Florida State is just as good as Notre Dame's win over Louisville. So there's merit to the argument, but I would side with Carolina.
All right. Well, I am going to go ahead and give this last spot here to North Carolina. Salika, I believe that Notre Dame is serious consideration here as we move on to the 3-line. Titel, let me go to you here. Who would be your 4 number 3 seeds as we sit right now?
I can live with Notre Dame. I don't know that they're the next best ACC team. Like Louisville has done some really good things, and even though Louisville lost to Notre Dame, I think that the ACC is good enough and top-heavy enough that we can get 2 of them in there. As far as the other teams, we got to get some Big 12 team in there. We've talked about West Virginia and Kansas's Baylor as the 3 musketeers atop that conference. So I want to get a little Press Virginia in there. Then as a 4th team, I mean, you can make a very good case for Oregon. I'm leaning Butler just because when you beat Arizona and Villanova and Xavier, it impresses me a lot.
Well, so are you not going Creighton by this point then?
I want to, and I think it's one of those, if you're picking today, Creighton has a great resume as of January 17th. But as David said, I like to look ahead. I mean, they have a great resume, so I'm not going to lose sleep putting in an 18-1 team with a lot of Villanova. But looking forward, I think that they're going to keep dropping, unfortunately.
Okay, so you would go with Butler here. David, let me turn to you. Who would your 4 teams be here?
I actually have West Virginia, who I really like. I have both Creighton and Butler here. And the other team I have up here, which is Virginia, and I love their wins. I love that win at Louisville. I just think that it's really good. So,
David, you're going Virginia before you go Notre Dame or Louisville.
Correct, yeah. Now, they're all very close. I think it's a coin flip. I kind of went back and forth with it. But, I mean – when 2 things are close, head-to-head, like Virginia beat Louisville at Louisville. So if it's at all close, how can you not have Virginia higher? And Notre Dame, while good, we just looked at them. Yeah, they're unbeaten in conference, but they haven't really taken on the heavyweights yet.
Right, and there again is Notre Dame's profile compared to Virginia's, and you see those 3 top 50 wins at Louisville, at Cal, at Clemson. Titel, I'm sorry, Salika, I know you would have Notre Dame in at this point, but why don't you give me your next 3 as well?
Well, besides Notre Dame, I would also add Creighton. I would add West Virginia. And if we're going coin flip, I'm going to take Louisville over Butler for the time being. Louisville already has a win against Kentucky. They also have a win against Duke, which I think can also be a protected seed. But I think the other thing that's keeping Butler off the 3 for now are their 2 bad losses against St. John's and Indiana State.
Well, yeah. But do you really think that loss at Indiana State was an upset?
Vito Vecchio's not here, so I'm not getting into that again.
Well, we've had a consensus. All 3 of you do believe West Virginia belongs to this line. I've actually had 2 votes each for Creighton, Louisville, Notre Dame, and Butler. So I kind of have to make a tiebreaker here. And despite what some people may say about the Indiana State loss, I think that is so ugly on Butler's profile that I would go, if I've got to make the call here, I'm going to go Notre Dame, Creighton, and Louisville here to finish out the 3 line. Butler, I think, is right there to start out the next line. Salika, let me stick with you then. Let me go back to here for your 4. We've actually had all your teams in so far, I believe. So why don't you give me your 4 seeds?
Well, I did tease Duke as one of the 4s, and this is where I would add Virginia. And my apologies to the Pac-12. I'm still going to stick with Florida over Oregon. I think their paper is better than Oregon, although I'm not so sure their team is going to be much better than Oregon just from an eye test.
All right. So you're going to go Florida, Duke, Virginia. Give me one more. That's only 3.
Didn't I give you Virginia?
You give me Virginia, Duke, and Florida. That's still 3.
Yeah. Oh, I
need 4.
I forgot to give you Butler.
Okay, give me Butler. Okay, and I thought you'd be giving me Butler here because I think that Butler is already been mentioned by everybody, so they're definitely going to be on this line. But Titel, why don't you give me 3 more teams to go with Butler?
3 to go with Butler. I want to get the Ducks in there. It has to be some ACC team because there's still so many good ones. I could do Virginia or Duke. I kind of want to lean both. As good as Florida's resume is, with 3 quality losses to Gonzaga, Duke, and the Seminoles, their best win is over a Miami team that is arguably not even a top 30 team by single digits at a neutral site. So I think I want to do both ACC teams of Duke and Virginia with the Ducks.
Duke and Virginia Ducks. And David, I've pulled up this Florida profile here. I know they have a huge RPI numbers, as high as 3 in some of the ratings right now.
Yeah. Well,
But isn't it a kind of a fraudulent RPI almost because they played so many neutral court games?
Fraudulent might be overstating it. I mean, I think it could be misleading, but at the same time, they weren't playing at home. It was harder to win those games than it was to just win regular home bye games. So I don't think you should punish them for it.
But aren't they getting extra credit for beating Mercer, Charlotte, and Belmont, and Florida Gulf Coast, and St. Bonaventure, who they would have been whether it was home or neutral court, no matter what?
Yeah, they are.
That's still a lot of time they spend on the road, though.
Yeah, but you know what? Other teams should go out there and play on the road if they don't like it.
Well, David, I know you do like Virginia here, and we've already put Butler in. Why don't you give?
The funny thing is, I don't really like Florida on this line. I'm just defending them. I applaud them for playing so many road games, although it was due to circumstance, not choice. Good for them. I'm glad their numbers are high.
Well, David, so who would you go with side besides Butler and Virginia on this line?
Oregon and Duke.
Oregon and Duke. Well, I think we kind of have a consensus there then, because the only other team that even got any consideration was that Florida team, and I'm surprised nobody mentioned Titel, your Arizona Wildcats yet here.
They're my very next team.
They're your very next team. Well, David, I was going to go to you next anyhow, so why don't we discuss Arizona, though, as I pull their profile up. And I'd argue that this is just as good of a profile as you're looking at for Oregon here, with only 2 top 10 losses to Butler and Gonzaga, the Michigan State win, the win at Cal.
Mm-hmm. It is good. I just like Oregon's team a lot. I think they're really hitting their stride. They're playing better and better. There is some blah on their profile, but a lot of it was in November. I think they're a lot better now than they were in November. It seems like when they went into the winter break, albeit they were playing a lot of home bye games, they've really kicked it in the gear, and they've really looked good. I just like this Oregon team.
Okay, well, this is the Arizona profile. I'm going to switch it over to the Oregon profile. You see, David, you always love road wins, and their best road win is Washington State. So they don't really have the road win, and they have this ugly loss to a Georgetown team that's probably going to be a sub-100 loss by the end of the year.
Right, and then they got creamed by Baylor. But again, and you look at the dates, November 15th, November 21, I just think Oregon has a big head of steam going. And will ultimately, I just think they're better than Arizona right now.
Well,
but, I mean, to your point, Arizona's paper is probably as good or better.
Well, John T, why would you have Oregon over Arizona?
Because I think a month ago, Arizona was looking healthier than the Ducks when Dylan Brooks was out and Parker Jackson Cartwright was okay. And it seems like they're just trending in the wrong direction. I think it's a coin flip right now. I really don't think Arizona is going to go into UCLA this weekend and come out with a win. I mean, you have these 7-footers with Ristic and Markkanen. Who is going to guard TJ Leaf while he's making threes? And who on earth is going to guard Lonzo Ball? Like, I really think that the rude awakening is coming this weekend. So, kind of, again, looking ahead. Arizona's profile is right there. The win, like, over Michigan State, they were lucky. They had a full-court layup in the final seconds against a young team, not that they're an old team. You can make the argument. I just think the Ducks win over UCLA, as David's been saying, is one of the best wins all year.
Well, let's go ahead and get some predictions. Dave, let me go back to you here. I know you mentioned Arizona. Why don't you give me 3 more teams to go with them on the 5 line?
Who, me?
I'll start with David and then go to you.
Oh, okay. Well, the teams that you can just go ahead and put on the 5 line are Purdue, Whiskey, and Florida.
Purdue, Whiskey, and Florida. Okay, Titel, why don't you give me your 4 teams?
I agree with Florida. I don't think we're ready for the Big Ten just yet because we got to get Arizona in here, and then we got to do the Stalika Daily Double with a couple of teams from the great state of Ohio.
I'm sorry. Arizona is my top team.
Yeah,
I have Arizona, Purdue, Whiskey, and Florida. I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I had for you, David.
Okay,
You're good. Stalika, he went with your favorite team and your least favorite team. Why don't you give me your 4 teams, or at least 3 to go with Florida?
If he's talking about 2 teams in Ohio, why does he have Dayton up this high? I mean, I know Cincinnati he's high on. But
I thought he was going Youngstown. I really did.
Yeah.
But actually, I would go with Florida right here. I would go with Cincinnati. I would go with Arizona. And I would also go with Maryland.
Maryland. That's our first mention of Maryland, and we've now had 3 different Big Ten teams mentioned: Wisconsin, Purdue, and Maryland. And Titel, you didn't like any of them here. Is there a reason you bumped the Big Ten down? Because you are the guy looking ahead, and you don't even think a Big Ten team is going to be a 5 seed.
I remember back in the day when the best Ohio team was a Big Ten team, and as you can tell, that is no longer the case. Time to give a little love to some other Ohio schools. Wisconsin, Purdue, the other big Maryland, they're all solid. And maybe once they start beating up on each other, they'll get there. I just don't think the resume is there. Maryland has only had a couple of losses, but as we've said for the past couple of weeks, every single one of their wins has been by single digits, and lucky it's gonna run out. And how on earth do you have a team that lost to Nebraska up that high? Come on, David.
Yeah. No.
Well, David, do you think Maryland should be above Whiskey and Purdue?
No.
Okay, why not?
I don't think their paper is quite as good, and I don't think their team is quite as good. Other than that, yeah, sure, put them up there.
Well, but I'll try to make the case for Maryland since I'm the one that brought them up. They've already swept Illinois. They've also beaten Indiana, and they also won at Michigan, which has contributed to the Wolverines' tailspin. But other wins I would also keep an eye on that are relatively close to the field but not in it would be neutral court wins against Richmond and Kansas State that were in Barclays.
Slika, I was really waiting for you to convince me on Maryland. And by telling me that they beat Kansas State, I think you really did just convince me exactly what team to put here, and that would be Wisconsin.
Bruce Weber. Cincinnati, can we look at them real quick? I like them, not quite this much, though.
Chad hates puppies.
Well, Cincinnati
going to lose to the rest of the year. They're going to have 27 wins.
Probably so, yeah. But, how many of them will be against NIT teams or worse?
A lot, but 27 wins is pretty impressive, no?
It is, yeah. At Houston, it's not so bad. That's actually pretty good.
Okay. Well, good, because I wasn't going to change that because I do kind of agree with them both on that team.
Yeah.
We did get Wisconsin there. We did not get Purdue, Maryland, or Xavier in yet. Titel, let me go to – actually, where are we now? On the 6th line? Yeah, let's go to John T. Let me go to you here. I know you've mentioned Xavier already, but why don't you give me 3 other teams who you would put here with them?
I think we're ready for Purdue and some other Big Ten teams as well. I think it's right now a coin flip between Minnesota and Maryland. I think either of them can make it, and maybe both. As far as the 4th, even though St. Mary's lost to Gonzaga, when you lose to an undefeated team, you shouldn't get penalized too badly. I don't want to see St. Mary's win 29 again and miss the tourney again. That's just
won't happen.
I don't want to see that happen, so I want to get them in here and hope that if they continue to drop, they're still high enough to get in, because that would be very tragic.
Well, I know you don't want to dock for the Gonzaga loss, but don't you have to dock for the home loss to Texas Arlington?
Especially now that Arlington is dropping as well. You do. If you want to put in Minnesota and Maryland, we can make this a whole Big Ten line.
Okay. Well, Stalika, what would be your teams? I know you've liked Maryland already. Do you want to go with the whole Big Ten line here, Purdue and Minnesota as well?
I will say yes to Purdue and Minnesota, and this is where I would also add St. Mary's here.
Wait. Mr. Xavier just went St. Mary's over Xavier.
I'm a Xavier fan, but I'm not a Xavier homer here. They've got to be able to figure out how to close out these wins.
I concur. Xavier, I don't have them in yet because their best win, while good, is a neutral floor win against Clemson. And while there's no shame in some of their last 3 losses, there's no credit in it either. It's not hard to get out there and lose games.
And isn't Chad the one that says sprinkles are for winners, coffee is for closers?
I don't think I've ever said that in my life, actually. But I do have the St. Mary's profile up here because let's kind of take a look at this, David, before I get your picks here. This is that St. Mary's profile. We had mentioned that home loss to Arlington, loss to Gonzaga, and that's it. But really no wins against anybody who's solid in the field. I guess you could look at the win at Dayton. Still is pretty good. Then you go to Xavier. They've beaten Clemson. They've beaten Wake.
Wake is nuts. solidly in the field.
You don't think Clemson's solidly in the field?
I think Clemson is.
Mhm.
Well, more or less.
I don't think Wake
But
Forest
look
would
at Xavier's.
be a CBI.
Look at the losses here. They're all top 10 losses other than the loss at Colorado. I mean, so the losses are similar. If St. Mary's had played those same 4 teams instead of Gonzaga, don't you think St. Mary's would have the same record?
I think they would have gotten – well, it's an interesting hypothetical. I think it's really hard to win at St. Mary's. I think they could have beaten Creighton at home. And while I don't think Dayton is as good as Clemson, I think it's harder to win at Dayton than it is to beat Clemson at home. I realize that when guessing the real committee, they don't really factor in the difficulty of a game. It's more or less just who did you play and who did you beat, not whether or not it was at home. At least they seem to get away from that last year. But do I think Clemson is better than Dayton? Yes. Do I think it's harder to win at Dayton than it is to beat Clemson on a neutral floor? Yes. So I would consider St. Mary's win at Dayton better than anything Xavier currently has.
Okay.
Now, I will say this in defense of Xavier, though. When did Orlando suddenly become a home court for Xavier?
I wasn't. Like, they beat Clemson on a neutral court.
David, I know you like Purdue. Why don't you give me 3 teams to go with them on this line?
It was I agree with Stalika. I had St. Mary's, Minnie, and Maryland.
St. Mary's, Minnie, and Maryland. Well, we definitely have Purdue in here, along with, I guess we are going with the all Big Ten line here. We have Maryland, Minnesota, and St. Mary's.
They're not in the Big Ten, Chad.
They're not?
An all Big Ten line, Chad.
Well, okay.
It's kind of embarrassing to make a mistake.
Sorry about that.
I mean, all these people watching.
Okay, it's now fixed as Rutgers is going in on the 6th line. You asked for it, David.
What did I do?
3 teams on the Big Ten here, 1 team here at St. Mary's. Xavier's still not in the field, even though I think Titel wanted them on the 5 line. Stalika, let me go to you. Are you finally going to put them in when we get to the 7 line?
Yes, because I would have Xavier number 25 on my overall seed list. And I think this is where we really start to get kind of a divide between other teams in the field, because my next 3 are going to be Virginia Tech, Indiana, and Angry Frank's bunch.
Ooh.
David, you seem shocked. I don't. I actually kind of think that's a very solid grouping of 4 teams by John.
That's not why I'm shocked. Well, I had 3 of those 4, and I didn't think anybody would have Virginia Tech or Indiana this high.
Okay, so you have Virginia Tech, Indiana. Who would your other 2 be then?
Xavier, and I have Northwestern all the way up here. I know that their paper might not quite be there, but I love their team. I mean, they just blasted Iowa the other night.
Northwestern, a very impressive Titel in that win over Iowa. I know it was only Iowa, but, I mean, these are things that Northwestern teams have not done in the past. It's just going out there and won the games you're supposed to win and just crush somebody in doing so. Do you think Northwestern is right here in this 7-line discussion?
I have them as an 8, but that, of course, means that they're in the discussion for a 7.
Right.
Going back to Stalika, I think Indiana is going to be a fascinating case study this year. You can argue that beating Kansas and Carolina is a pair of impressive wins that compares to any team's resume. However, you can argue that no team we've mentioned so far has a loss as bad as Fort Wayne. I really don't know how to analyze this team because they're so far at each end of the spectrum. And besides those wins that I mentioned, Illinois and Rutgers, no offense, is not enough to get you as high as a 7 seed. So I'll give you Angry Frank. Virginia Tech I had on the 8, but I could live with them as a 7. I like USC. Like, they don't have a ton of amazing wins, but when your 3 losses are to Pac-12 teams, including Oregon, who is in the field, and Utah, who I think is going to make it eventually, a nice non-conference win against SMU, I think they're in the discussion. And speaking of SMU, I think they are as well.
I will say one other thing about Northwestern. They also won at Penn State, which is actually proven to be an occupational hazard for teams like Minnesota and Michigan State, even though that game was actually at the Palestra.
Well, we do have a consensus about both Xavier and Virginia Tech, and we have 2 votes each for both Indiana and South Carolina. And I think Titel is exactly right. David, let me have you respond to this Indiana issue here. I've got the profile up on the screen right now. One of the stranger profiles I ever remember seeing.
Yeah, and I think that it's very scattershot right now. It's going to be schizophrenic, but I think it's going to, by the time it's all over, everything's going to kind of land in the same place. That's generally how it is as it plays out. When you look at their losses, other than Fort Wayne, and that's not so terrible, there isn't a whole lot of bad things on there. There's just a lot of little bad things.
By the way, Titel, I think that Butler's loss to Indiana State's worse than the Fort Wayne loss. So I'll just throw that out there.
Sure.
I think what's sinking it is that I just think that there's a level of suck that once you cross it, it shouldn't matter anymore. Like, you're going to beat the 180th team without that much more difficulty than the 280th team. And when you look at their profile, the reason the RPI is so out of whack is because of, well, that all of that. So is the committee smart enough to, or how do they evaluate this? And the way I evaluate that is that you just kind of throw it out the window and realize the reason the RPI is out of whack is because of their schedule, not so much them. So that's how I analyze it.
And with the committee saying, or potentially looking at some other metrics, you look at their KenPom rating, which I do have on the screen right here. That's 26. That's right in line with, being a 7 seed.
Yeah. So, and again, I don't know how the committee is going to evaluate that. It is an odd case, like John said. I just know how I would evaluate it, and I would do it as such. So,
well, David, I know you've mentioned Northwestern. Let's move on to the 8 line here. Why don't you give me 3 other teams other than Northwestern who you like at this point?
Let me see. Okay, we've got I have Indiana, who's. Oh wait,
I put Indiana. I did put Indiana and South Carolina in. Yes.
Okay, hold on. Did I? I must have messed up something.
Well, let me go over to Salika.
Go to somebody else who has.
It wouldn't be the first time that the puppets messed up.
All right, Salika, why don't you give me 4? Because actually we have all of your teams in so far because you've been the most right apparently up till now. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to go with Michigan State and their brutal schedule here. This is where I would also add SMU as the second team out of the American. I finally add Northwestern. And I will also add the Miami Hurricanes here.
All right. You're going to go Miami. We have not had any mention of them yet. Titel, Miami, another one of these kind of strange, interesting profiles. I think it's maybe a sign of just the fact that we're getting to the garbage now as well. But I know you did mention USC. Well, who would your teams be at this point?
So I'll second the motion for SMU, and I'll second the motion for Northwestern. I have Michigan State on the 9, so they're in discussion for an 8, but I also like USC still.
Okay, USC and Michigan State. I got Miami's profile up here, though, Titel. Do you even have them in the field?
I do. I have them as a 10 and sinking. Like, it came so close against Notre Dame. That could really, make or break them. It destroyed Pitt on the road, which is nice. It got destroyed by Syracuse on the road, which is not. Another very weird profile with a lot of highs and lows.
Yeah.
David, have you gotten things sorted out now? I know you've
what I do is I try and delete the teams as we put them in from my seed list so I don't get confused, and it's sometimes hard to do when you don't have any arms. But I think I got it now. Northwestern, who I'd already mentioned, USC, who's been Michigan State, and SMU are my next 4.
Well, we actually have a fairly close to a consensus here because everybody has mentioned Northwestern for this line.
Trust me, on the next line we will not.
Everyone has also mentioned both SMU and Michigan State here. And we do have 2 votes for USC. So, Stalika, your Miami team is not going to make it in quite yet. But let me go, Titel, let me go to you here. Why don't we talk about the next 4 teams? Because we're now getting to the 9 line, and I think we have really reached a level of nose holding at this point.
The level of suck has risen greatly. I couldn't agree more. We haven't had an Ohio team in a while, so let's get another Ohio team there in the Flyers. We have not had an ACC team in a while besides Virginia Tech, and I don't think it's Miami, John S. I'll let you make the argument, but I think Clemson is a little better profile. I never thought I'd say this. Win over Wilmington might end up being their best win can be enough to get them this high. It's astonishing to consider. I think that Clemson's got to get a little love. I think TCU, despite getting blasted by West Virginia and Kansas, deserves a little love. And if I need a fourth, I mean, I could live with Miami. I think Iowa State has a couple of nice wins, and it looks like they beat some team named Miami.
Iowa State. Okay. Well, Stalika, I know you like Miami. Who would you put in there with Miami? He's mentioned Clemson, Iowa State, Dayton, and TCU.
I would agree as far as including Iowa State there, but this is where I'm going to start going off the beaten path. I'm going to add TCU here, and I'm also going to add the Hall.
Seton Hall had a rough game on yesterday.
Well, who hasn't had a rough game at Villanova?
Let me pull up their profile here, David, before I go to you and ask for your teams here. They've beaten Cal, they've beaten South Carolina, they've beaten Marquette at home, but it's just tough when you see a team lose 76-46, and it wasn't even that close, and they've now lost 4 out of 6 games.
Yes, a week ago, I think it was a week ago today, I said somewhere, I think it was either in the notes or in the email thread, how is a team that plays in a power conference that's 24-6 overall in their last 30 games, it's 14-4 in their last 18 conference games, and the defending conference champion gets so little attention? And on cue, Seton Hall has lost their next 3 games. So my apologies to Seton Hall.
David, why don't you give me your 4 teams for this line?
Well, we're getting to a point to where we're transitioning from first ballot to inside the bubble, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of suck. Well, I have 2 teams on this line that I don't think suck. At the top of the line, I have Middle Tennessee. They don't suck. I think that they suck a lot less than some of the teams that are behind them, even if their paper isn't quite there. We've mentioned Iowa State and Clemson. I have them both on this line. And then a team that I think will win out the rest of the way and win in some snake pits that might not have the paper, but that I think looks really good. I have Illinois State all the way up here.
Really? I was typing in UNC Wilmington. I thought that's where you were going.
They were they're the next one down. Yeah.
All right. Let's.
I thought I was the one smoking crack on Illinois State.
Let's start with something easy. All 4 of you actually like Iowa State on this line, so that's nice and easy. That gives us 1 team in here. We've also heard 2 votes for both Clemson and TCU. So those 2 become kind of easy as well.
God, you all are
TCU, David, I understand the weak strength of schedule and the weak games. I'll pull up their profile here for you in a second. You were the one that did not like TCU here, but you just mentioned Illinois State. What do I see there, David?
Well, I mean, okay, if you want to be technical about it.
They've also,
a home win against Illinois State. Okay.
A home win over Iowa State, who we just mentioned, and only 3 losses, all to teams that are way above this line in the field.
Yeah. I mean, I have TCU in my field, so I'm warming up to them a little bit. I'm just not this hot on them.
All right. I
think I have TCU in the field. They may have just missed it, but they're very close. I mean, it's not that I'm ignoring them entirely.
Okay. We've had mention of both Miami and Seton Hall and Dayton. Miami, Seton Hall, and Dayton, all of which we've not put in yet. But I want to take a look at these 2 mid-major schools that David brought up. Tytel, I want to get your comments on them. Start with this Middle Tennessee team. Any chance that they get up this high into this 9 seed range if they do win out here, which they've got a great shot doing playing in Conference USA?
Yes. I mean, if they can end up with like 28 wins or something, I think that is a fair discussion. Shame they couldn't beat VCU on the road. 3-point loss. That could have swung it a lot. The win over Wilmington is amazing. The road win over Ole Miss by 15 is even, I mean, killing the SEC. Mississippi and Vanderbilt. Strike 1, strike 2.
Yeah, I mean, look what they did to Vanderbilt, 71-48, too. That was a thrashing of a Vanderbilt team that at times has been competitive this year.
Can you scroll down further, Chad? Because I want to see when Middle Tennessee goes to snake pits like Western Kentucky and UAB.
Yeah, they've got some road tests left, but not that many. The Florida International trip is a joke. The San Antonio UTEP trip is a joke. It is that game at Western Kentucky, the game at Marshall, that are probably their two best chances.
That's right. Marshall's no picnic either this year.
I think they'll run over Western Kentucky. Marshall might give them some trouble, but half the arena is going to be for Middle Tennessee at that Western Kentucky game.
The other team that he mentioned, Stalika, was this Illinois State team, and this one I get even less than the Middle Tennessee. When you have a sub 150 loss to Murray State, you don't even have those couple of nice things at the top of the profile. Stalika.
Stalika.
Do you agree with it? Do you want to rip him apart for the Illinois State pick or no? David, we seem to have lost him here. David?
No, I would not like to rip me apart for the Middle Tennessee or for the Illinois State pick. I think that they're a good team that has a good shot of coming very close to running the table, minus the trip to Wichita.
Well,
the paper is not there. It's more how good I think they are as opposed to how good their paper is.
Titel, I just asked you this same question about Middle Tennessee. If this Illinois State team runs the table, including winning at Wichita State, which would be fairly decent, is this team have any shot of seeing this 9 line that David's talking to them about?
No, and hell no. I mean, at Murray State, that's going to become a RPI 200-plus loss, I fear, very soon, and you just can't have that and be that high.
All right. David,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we've got Stalika back, but what I'm going to do here is we've got to make a choice here between these teams here. I'm going to end up going with the Miami choice. I think I think we've overruled the Middle Tennessee and the Illinois State choice, although I think Middle Tennessee is right there, David. I think it's a very interesting pick at this point. I just think it's still a little too early for them at the 9 line. But on that note, let me go over to Sleek. If we have you back here, your Seton Hall team is not in yet. Why don't you give me 3 more to go with them, though?
Well, besides Seton Hall, this is where I would start to add teams from the Atlantic 10. I would also add VCU. I would add Dayton. I mean, I hope they've gotten their annual boo-boos out of the way. And I know this is a team that's starting to fade a little bit, but at least they got a nice win away from home tonight, and that would be the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Titel, does Arkansas belong in this field?
Only by the skin of their nose and the hair of their chinny chin chin, because they're fading fast as well. A quick note about the A-10. Last year they had 6 teams who won 20 games. I'm worried that it's going to be closer to 2 this year. It's sad to see a conference go from such a high to such a low. I think the Razorbacks will get in only because there's a bigger level of suck with others. But, yeah, I mean, you can't hang your hat on wins over Texas, Tennessee, and Missouri. Those are, like, bad wins.
Yeah, here's that Arkansas profile, David.
Not a
where is the meat here? They won at A&M today, and that may be their best win of the season. And its A&M team is not any good this year.
Yeah, I think the win at Tennessee is at least notable, but I haven't been big on Arkansas really at any point. I think they racked up a bunch of home bye wins, and then when their schedule got tougher, they stopped winning. They're just not there. Another team I don't have close is VCU. I am just very underwhelmed with them. I know they have the home win against Middle, but it was a home win. Barely.
Well, I'll pull up that VCU profile, David. I know you want Middle Tennessee and Illinois State in the field already, and I'm almost cringing as to what you would want next beyond the 2 of them. But why don't you go ahead and tell me who your next 2 teams are here as we do take a quick look at that VCU profile, again, with Middle Tennessee and a bunch of nothing.
It's like my next 2, Seton Hall, who has been mentioned, and Wilmington is my whole line is Middle, Illinois State, Seton Hall, and Wilmington.
Okay. And that UNC Wilmington team is a team that we have not yet mentioned. Titel, let me go to you here and find out who your teams are, and then as I get that UNC Wilmington profile put together.
Middle's putting together a nice resume. I can put them up here. I think Illinois State is just a little far away. It was a great win over the Shockers, but it was 1 win. We need to get some A-10 teams in here. Like, you can't – even even if they don't deserve it, I think we're going to get some of them. Even if you don't want Dayton and VCU, give me one, please.
Well, they're going to get someone in. They have an automatic qualifier.
Okay. So Titel, you do like Dayton, who you mentioned previously. You like Middle Tennessee. Why don't you give me two more to go with them?
While I hold my nose, I'll give Pitt, even though they're trending downwards, just because a win over Virginia will carry a lot of weight in March. If I had to pick a fourth, it's hard. I mean, Texas Tech beating West Virginia, I think, is going to count for a lot too. So I'll go with the Red Raiders.
So you're not willing to go Seton Hall at this point?
Sorry, I thought they were automatically. And yes, I do like Seton Hall.
Oh, okay. Then I will give you Seton Hall here as your last team. I don't believe we put them in yet. Let me get that list back up. No, we did not.
I thought you were throwing Stalika a bone with them. My apologies.
No problem. Well, let's put Seton Hall in right now then. The other teams that have been mentioned by multiples have been both Dayton and Middle Tennessee. So we're going to go ahead and put them in. And before we make the decision here on this last team, I want to pull up this UNC Wilmington profile because this is the other mid-major that is getting a lot of consideration here. They don't have the top of the profile wins, but they've done really nothing bad at all. And Titel is another team that could realistically run the table, especially if they can get the win this week at College of Charleston, coming up in a huge game Thursday night. Is this team 10 seed capable?
If they win out, yes. No shame in losing to Middle Tennessee or at Clemson, and no bad losses. I'd like them to have some top 90 win at some point, but Charleston's a good way to get it. If they can sweep Charleston, I think they might run the table. If they split with Charleston, I think that a single-digit seed is out the door.
Well, we do have to make another choice here for one more team. The teams that have been mentioned are this Wilmington team, Pittsburgh, Arkansas, Illinois State, and VCU. Wow, what a rough group here.
VCU is just not there.
Who said Pittsburgh?
Who said Pittsburgh? Titel did.
Did you see what Pittsburgh did tonight?
Yes, they lost to a bad NC State team, but I'm telling you that win in Virginia, they're clinging to it with both hands, but I think it might help down the road.
Let me take a look at this Pittsburgh profile here for everybody. I'll tell you quite honestly, I really like this Wilmington team, and I think if you put Middle Tennessee, as I've been looking at things all season, I kind of been looking at Middle Tennessee and Wilmington almost need to be paired near each other. But Pittsburgh at Maryland, home against Virginia, also a win over Marquette. Yeah, they lost to NC State, and yeah, they've lost 5 out of 6. Oh,
Trending down.
This shows you the garbage. Look at that, 5 out of 6 that they've lost here. It's tough to say that team deserves to be in at this point. It really is. How come nobody has mentioned the other team from the state of Illinois, though? The Fighting Illini. David?
Because why would we?
Let me pull up their profile here. I know that this is a team that lost today and lost badly, but they lost to Purdue.
Okay, their wins are home against NC State and then neutral floor versus VCU, neither of whom I have in yet either.
Okay.
So,
all right, it's just one other team that I thought might get some consideration at this point. I will make my call here, and
do it.
Due to the pain of everything else, I think this is the best overall record, and that might be the reason why I have to go with them, because at least I'm not totally holding my nose with them. Let's go UNC Wilmington here.
All right. Is Miami in yet? Yeah, they're in. Okay.
They are in. We are down to still, God, we got to put 7 more teams in as at-large bids in this field. This is rough.
Illinois State's not in. Okay.
We are on the 11 line.
Oh,
David, while you're counting things up, Titel, let me go to you here. Why don't you give me 4 teams? I guess you have mentioned Pittsburgh already, so why don't you give me 3 more to go with them if you can stomach it?
I like the 3 top ones on the under consideration. Of the level of suck existing, I like Arkansas, VCU, and Illinois to join them.
I do not like Arkansas.
Arkansas, VCU, and Illinois. David, you're muttering there. Why don't you tell me who your 4 teams are?
Okay, I actually
besides
do
Illinois State.
Besides them, who isn't in yet, I do like Pitt here. I am pulling them out here, so it's not like I was that far off. California, who I don't think anybody's mentioned yet, I'm starting to warm up to them some, and they had a nice win at USC, which again what has anybody else that we haven't discussed yet done? And then Texas Tech, who also isn't in yet. I have them. That's my 11 line.
Texas Tech as well. Stalika, do you want to set the record straight here as to who really should be in?
I think I'd mentioned VCU and Arkansas earlier.
Correct.
And this is where I actually would have Illinois as far as the 11 line. And then we go down a little further downstate to Illinois State, my other 11.
You're doing this Illinois State thing on me too here. I can't believe this. And by virtue of the rules that we have here, they may be about to go into the field. We do have multiple votes here for Pittsburgh, so they are in.
I mean, I know Illinois State is going to need a waiver after losing at Tulsa, and I suppose you could argue the same thing for losing at Murray State, but they have a few decent wins to offset that.
Well,
Utah State, Fort Wayne. I suppose St. Joe's could also be considered.
Well, you have to consider this. When they lost at Murray State was top of the RPI.
Well, looking at things here, there are, after the teams have got multiple votes, we have two teams left to consider for the last spot here that both got multiple votes, Arkansas and Illinois State. Luckily, given that I get to break the tie here, I can save us a little bit and go.
Arkansas is terrible.
Yes, they are. Illinois State is terrible as well, David.
No, they're not. Cal isn't. Texas Tech isn't. Don't put
Well, Arkansas will be a first four team, so there is that.
Arkansas would be the first of our first four teams. There are actually only 3 at-large spots left. Obviously, if we put Illinois State in, we'll need to get 4 more teams. But why don't we start here? David, why don't I start with you in this slide? I know you still want Illinois State in. I know you want Cal in. Why don't you give me – actually, I know you want Texas Tech in. Why don't you just give me one more team beyond those?
My next team down is Marquette.
Okay. We have not yet mentioned Marquette. Let me get them up here on the under consideration board. While Titel, I'm going to pull their profile up and ask you, first of all, this Marquette team is one of these teams that should be going to Dayton, and who else you would have with them as well.
So let's scroll down to the Marquette losses if we could.
Yeah, there's 6 of them.
And 5 of them are okay, and 6th one at home to Michigan by 18 is not, although Michigan could be on the verge of a nice little upset as we speak. When your best win is Seton Hall by 3 at home, decent resume and in a year of level of suck that it might squeeze in, but I'd actually prefer Illinois State to Marquette.
Well, their only true home loss was against Wisconsin. I mean, you were actually there for the, loss against Michigan, were you not?
It was. I'm trying to block it out of my mind, unfortunately. But.
All right. Well, Titel, who would you have besides Illinois State? Why don't you give me 3 more to go with them?
I want Texas Tech there. When you beat West Virginia and nobody else can, I think that is worthy. I know it's crazy to think that the Missouri Valley could get 2 bids, but if we've already got Illinois State in there, I think that the Shockers might shock us all and somehow squeeze in. I don't know how that whoever does not win that conference championship is going to have a decent enough at-large resume, because I'm just not seeing it either, but it could happen, and we're getting down to it. If you want to throw a Big 12 team in, maybe also Kansas State, but again, now we're getting to deep suckiness.
Well, you don't like David's pick then of California here.
I don't. I mean, they almost beat Arizona. Like, they're a decent team. I like the roster. If you want to throw up their profile, I can pick it apart. But
well, go ahead and throw it up because the one thing that's on it that kind of popped at me was this win at USC. And when I'm looking for what sets them apart from everybody else, that definitely sets them apart in a good way. And their losses, while plentiful, aren't bad or aren't terrible.
I'll be honest with you. I'm surprised that Pittsburgh actually got voted in the field, because I think after tonight's results, I actually put California as my last team in and it is my first team out. I mean, it's pretty hard to justify being 1-5 in the ACC, strong as it might be.
I had VCU and Arkansas way out, like several lines out. But
well, Stalika, you said you like Cal in here. Who would be your other teams along with them?
Well, believe it or not, I would actually concur with John T. about actually having two Valley teams, even if Chad says Wichita doesn't belong. So
Chad is rarely right about anything, but he's right about that.
Okay,
But
go ahead. Wichita
how many
State,
more-
Cal, two more.
I am going to add Michigan and Marquette.
Okay, Michigan is a team nobody's mentioned yet, and we are doing this while this Michigan-Wisconsin game is going on. And obviously, they're up 3 right now in the second half. If they win this game, I think we would all suddenly have them in the field.
Right.
But given that we're doing this exercise before this game goes final, and that Wisconsin's probably going to come back and win it, they do have the neutral court win over SMU, a neutral court win over Marquette team that we're talking about right in the same ballpark, and really nothing that bad, Titel, do they?
I agree. I mean, as we said, like, the reason it's called a bubble is because everybody could go in or out, and it does change every single day. Like, at first I wanted to say that's an exaggeration, but upon further reflection, I think you're right. I don't know if this season is different from other seasons, but Michigan right now is out. If you win at Wisconsin, I think you're in. I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and choose a few teams here and start with a couple teams that did get multiple votes here, which do include Texas Tech and California, leaving us with exactly one team left to decide to finish out our at-large bids. And the teams that have been mentioned for this are Marquette, Michigan, Wichita State, and that's it. I want to talk about Wichita State, David, and I know since you're on my side of this, I'm going to call on you for this because I would like somebody to tell me where Wichita State's wins are because I'm scrolling down and not finding them. Here we go. They beat Drake. Okay. Why does this team even get consideration other than the name on their jerseys, David?
Well, you're really having to use your imagination here. They haven't even beaten anybody that will be in a position to make the NIT, I don't think. I'm trying to find their best win, and I think it was at Colorado State at a time when Colorado State was at full strength. So even though that shows up a little bit lower on the profile, I think you have to give them some credit for that. Outside of that, there's just nothing here. They've essentially won what we would call buy game equivalents if they were actually buy games and not regular games.
I agree with you. I'm going to have to make a final decision here.
Right. Well, because you put the wrong teams in the field, there were some that were inside my bubble.
Okay, well, why don't you mention a few other teams? I'll go through each of you here, mention a few other teams besides Marquette, Michigan, and Wichita State who you think are close and should at least be discussed at this point.
Okay. Well, one team that is close, and again, they're having a little bit of issues with their paper, but I really like this team, and I would not be surprised if they finish the season 30-2, is New Mexico State. I actually have them right on the bubble. They're one of my last teams in. I know that the committee isn't going to like them, and I know that you're probably laughing to hear me say that because of how critical I was of Stephen F. Austin in the past. But I really like this New Mexico State team. I think they're
David, you were just critical of Wichita State. Well, let's find New Mexico State's wins because Wichita State's looking for them too. Bethune-Cookman, that's a big one.
Well, they won at Arizona State, who might win some home games this year.
But wait, they lost to Colorado State. At least Wichita won at Colorado State, David. Come on.
The paper isn't quite there. I don't think the paper is representative for how good they are. It's a little bit rough.
It's not their fault that Grand Canyon's not as good this year.
It is their fault they didn't bother scheduling anybody.
Right. As a case study, even if they are 30-2, I don't think the committee takes them unless that they happen to win that last one. If you want my own opinion, I think that they're better than what their profile indicates.
Titel, is there anybody else that we have not discussed that you think we should be under consideration here?
No, but I'm going to throw one out anyway. If you want to talk about a ridiculous profile, I give you the Akron Zips. They're 2 power conference or big team losses at Creighton and at Gonzaga. Those stand among 2 of the best teams that we've seen all year.
Akron is right behind New Mexico State on my seed list, so I like this team.
Your other loss, you're going to have to go a little farther down. It's ridiculous.
It was the first game of the season. They weren't quite ready yet, but yeah, that's the loss at Youngstown. I actually watched that game, believe it or not. I thought Youngstown was a good team after I saw that game get played, and they proved me wrong.
Just think about that. If they had won that opening road game the first weekend of the season, they still haven't beaten anybody. But if your only losses are at Creighton and at Gonzaga, and you go like 29-2. I mean, what a case study. Who would have thunk it?
Well, Stalika, is there anybody else that you think we haven't mentioned yet that should be under consideration for this last spot or right outside of it?
I think Utah's getting closer, especially with their win against USC last week. But let's see how they do when they hit the road, because they're going to need at least 1 or 2 wins away from Salt Lake to really get closer to consideration.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up this Utah profile here. Again, win over USC, win over Colorado. It's just lacking in the meat of the wins. And no, this is probably intentional because they knew they didn't have guys like David Collette coming in until the second semester. You don't schedule that hard non-conference. But the drawback of that is, you're going to have to beat Oregon. Maybe you have to win Oregon on the road in order to get the signature win to get in the field.
And they're going to have to sweep the Washington schools to really stay in consideration as well.
Yeah, you got to win all 4 against the Washington schools. You probably got to sweep Stanford. You got to win at Colorado. There's so many. They have no margin for error left at all, despite a gaudy overall record.
That's still better than what we expected at the beginning of the year.
Well,
oh yeah,
we do have to make a final decision here, and I'm going to go ahead and choose the Michigan Wolverines so that if they do win this game tonight, we can all look right. And nobody will laugh at us for choosing the wrong team. I think it's real close between them and Marquette for the last spot, quite honestly. I'm not there on the Wichita State pick. I'm not there on Akron or Utah. I do got to do this for our colleague Joby Fortson, though, because it's a team we have not discussed tonight. I think that's us if we don't.
No, what about Georgia? Not Georgia Tech, Georgia. That would be the better. Oh.
The Georgia Tech team here, we discussed this a little bit last night in the Hoops HD report. They got 4 nice things at the top of the profile there, and a lot of losses.
Yeah.
But I think that that 4 collection of wins there, or at least the North Carolina and the Clemson wins, the at VCU win, those are teams we put in the field at least, are better than these other teams that we just discussed in the same group, aren't they?
They are. Those 4 collection, but I mean the whole profile is lacking somewhat.
Well, didn't we put Indiana in as a 7 seed with 3 nice wins and a bunch of garbage?
Yeah.
Isn't it the same?
Their nice wins are a little nicer.
Okay. Well, that's why they were 7 out of 12. Georgia is another team that I think might be near the bubble here. Rhode Island as well. I don't necessarily agree that Kansas State or someone like that is there. Is there anyone else that we did not put in the field that you think is moving in the right direction, at least, either from the under consideration board here or that did not quite make this board here? Let me run through each of you on that. Tytel, let me start with you.
I would say Georgia Tech. I had given up on them very early on. And the fact that they're in this discussion, I think is a valid discussion. As Joby said in earlier podcasts, and as you just said, it's a great quartet of wins, and they did pile up a bunch of losses, but trending in the right direction, I think.
Stalika.
I think if we're talking in terms of momentum, I think we also have to consider Penn State out of the Big Ten because they've already beaten Michigan State and Minnesota. They also have wins against Georgia Tech, and I suppose their best pure road win is going to be at GW at this point. Sorry, Rutgers and St. John's don't count.
David, let me pull up a profile before I go to here. This is a team that I'm almost surprised you didn't mention here. And it's very rare we'd speak any Mountain West, but Nevada's starting to put a little bit together here.
It's kind of funny because that was going to be the team I was going to mention when you meant to me. And the reason is they're not quite there yet, but I think that they're good enough to blow through the rest of the conference. And if they do, if they're an outright first-place team that avoids bad losses outside of the ones that they already have, is that enough? And I'm thinking it might be.
Right.
I defer to Titel, but it seems like the committee likes outright first-place finishers that avoid bad losses.
Well, Titel, what do you think about that question? If, let's say they lose one more game, they lose the game at Boise, but they win at San Diego State, they beat Boise at home, they make it to the conference title game, maybe they get upset there by a team like Boise or San Diego State. Do you think that this Nevada team could get in?
As an at-large, I don't.
Okay.
It's a shame, though, as if you look right in the middle there, they're a few points away from having their only loss beat at St. Mary's, which is kind of like the Akron resume, like when your only losses are top of the line, and I think you have a strong case, but it's a shame they're literally like 5 points away from having one loss.
Let me go ahead and go ahead. I'm going to reveal the 13 through the 16 lines magically super fast here. Or maybe not. There they go. From Monmouth all the way down to LIU, Brooklyn. If you want to hear a little more discussion about some of these teams, we're going to be doing Under the Radar podcast tomorrow night. But let me run through each of you here for any final comments about now seeing our full 1 through 68 and ask you if there's anything glaring that you think we got right or got wrong or the like. David?
I don't understand Arkansas and VCU. I can – as bad as Illinois smells, I don't think that one's completely outrageous. But I just don't get what it is that everybody, not just the rest of you, but all of Hoops HD seems to like about Arkansas and VCU.
Titel.
A couple of things. One, I see a lot of 10-7 upsets there. Sorry, Stalika. And secondly, I don't think any single number one seed wants to see Michigan State as the winner of the 8-9 game. Can you imagine? I mean, all Tom Izzo does in March is win last year aside. Like that could be a monumental upset.
Yeah, and if you look, like we said before, if you look down below us here, you could see how we are predicting them to match up based on this bracket. I will have that up on the website below us. But Stalika, let me finish things out with you. Sorry,
one more quick thought. One more. Sorry, Chad. At the time we're watching this, I am watching Evansville beat Wichita State. So another reason Wichita will probably win this one, but a good selection to not select them.
Okay, John Stalika.
We need to give Chad a little more time to start warming up to 3 branch UNC campuses. Everyone can agree on Wilmington, but eventually you'll see the light and start adding Asheville and Greensboro to your lists.
I went with what I feel is the best team in each conference, regardless of current conference record, in putting together that 13 through 16 lines. I actually, one that I'll tell you quite honestly that threw me the toughest was Texas Arlington being 2 games behind Georgia Southern right now, but they still have that win at St. Mary's. They fall 3 games behind. They're good. I'm no longer be protecting them anymore. That's sorry, David.
Oh yeah.
Okay. But on that note, I'm going to pull this down here, and we do want to thank everybody for joining us. Like we said, you can check out the bracket down below, but on behalf of myself, Chad Sherwood, David Griggs, John Titel, John Stalika, anybody else that might be hiding around here, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again real soon.